In writing of the American Civil War, Stephen Vincent Benet succinctly described one of the greatest challenges that has confronted field commanders throughout military history. If you take a flat map, Benet said, and move wooden blocks upon it strategically, the thing looks well, the blocks behave as they should. The science of war is moving live men like blocks and getting the blocks into place at a fixed moment. But it takes time to mold your men into blocks. And flat maps turn into country where creeks and gullies hamper your wooden squares. They stick in the brush. They are tired and rest, and you cannot lift them up in your hand and move them. It is all so clear in the maps, so clear in the mind. But the orders are slow. The men in the blocks are slow to move. When they start, they take too long on the way. The implacable hostility of terrain, the impersonal enmity of natural obstacles across which units must maneuver, often at great delay and peril, has long plagued the field commander. During the first half of the 20th century, mobility on the battlefield slipped farther and farther behind firepower and communications, the other basic elements in waging effective warfare. For centuries, an unyielding problem. Today, in our decade, a solution. As early as the Korean War, the helicopter had proved itself in limited battlefield roles. And the swift, large-scale movement of troops by aircraft had been commonplace since World War II. But such deployment was primarily strategic and had definite restrictions. Once on the ground, the soldier was again bound by terrain and had little tactical mobility. To overcome this handicap, the 11th Air Assault Division was formed in 1963 to field test a radically new concept known as air mobility. In its simplest terms, that concept envisaged the use of organic Army aircraft instead of wheeled and tracked vehicles to perform all the normal functions required of a unit in combat. That is, the aircraft would replace ground vehicles rather than supplementing them as in a standard division. For some 2.5 years, all aspects of the air mobility concept were developed, tested, evaluated, and refined during almost 100 studies, analyses, war games, and field tests. By June of 1965, the Army had made its point. Secretary of Defense McNamara announced that a permanent unit would be organized around the new concept and that it would be known as the 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile. On the 1st of July, in a ceremony at Fort Benning, aptly symbolizing the replacement of the horse by the helicopter, the new Airmobile concept formally became a part of the regular Army. Almost at once, however, the pageantry of the occasion was forgotten in the feverish activity of movement overseas. On July 28th, orders had come down from the Commander-in-Chief. Move out for South Vietnam. Although the weight of equipment and materiel for a unit that makes a religion of traveling, lean and mean, is only 1/3 that of a standard division, overseas movement to a combat zone some 10,000 miles away remains a formidable task. 15,000 men, 485 aircraft, 1,600 vehicles, hundreds of tons of equipment. Such an operation is roughly equivalent to moving half the population of Fairbanks, Alaska, and all their homes and personal belongings to Sydney, Australia. And in addition to the preparations characteristic of any overseas deployment, there were others unique to the 1st Air Cav. Helicopters that were to travel topside were enclosed in special cocoons to protect sensitive controls from the salt air and spray. Also, helicopters were fitted out with modification kits, including armored seats, And the troops were checked out on the M16 rifles which the division had just received. A large order for any division, much less one not yet a month old. But the exhaustive maneuvers of the 11th Air Assault days had done more than test a concept. They had also served as a shakedown exercise that molded a division of men drawn from widely disparate sources into a smoothly working team with an esprit de corps unsurpassed in the Army. On August 7th, only 10 days after President Johnson announced that the division would be sent to Vietnam, the first ship was underway. In late August, an advance party of about 1,000 men arrived by air at a then little-known place called An Khe, some 250 miles northeast of Saigon. Within a few days, they had planned and begun work on a base camp in preparation for the arrival of the main unit. One of the first tasks was to clear a landing site for the hundreds of helicopters. The huge primary heliport, located in the middle of the camp, was nicknamed the golf course because of the nature in which it was cleared. The area was skimmed solely by hand, leaving the grassy topsoil undisturbed to cut down on dust hazards during the dry seasons and mud during the monsoons. Meanwhile, at the then primitive An Khe airstrip, Army and Air Force transports began bringing in the equipment to construct and sustain the base. Rations, replacement parts, building materials, ammunition, POL, barbed wire by the mile. The advance preparations were right on schedule. In early September, the division's ships began dropping anchor off Qui Nhon, some 40 miles southeast of An Khe. With efficiency born of months of experience, the crews quickly began restoring the aircraft to flight readiness and ferrying the helicopters ashore. For the troops themselves, it was an over-the-beach landing and the prospect of returning to the type of operations for which they had been uniquely trained. On hand to welcome this, the 1st Full Army Division in Vietnam were the top commanders in the area, including General William C. Westmoreland, MACV Commander, and Major General Harry W.O. Kennard, the 1st Cavs Commander. From commander to recruit, one question was uppermost in the minds of all at this time. How would the division fare in combat? Would the basic concept of air mobility, using organic aircraft instead of vehicles, survive the Cavs' first baptism of fire? In this film, we will examine the major kinds of operations conducted by the 1st Air Cavalry in Vietnam and see how it fulfills the major functions required of any division in combat. Although the organization of the 1st Air Cav is unique, any unit involved in counter-guerrilla warfare can profit from the experience, the know-how, the lessons learned by the 1st team in Vietnam. From the beaches at Qui Nhon, the 1st team relied solely upon its organic helicopters, augmented by one company of caribous for troop movement from the coast to its base camp in Central Highlands. Airlift precluded the chance of attack along Route 19 and also emphasized a basic air mobile tactic and a lesson learned and relearned many times by all units in Vietnam: the enemy can't ambush you when you fly over him. Soon, all the tactics and techniques of air mobility would be put to their ultimate test: combat. Combat ranging through Vietnam's harsh extremes of terrain and weather. The unit's equipment and vehicles, some 1,500 fewer than in a standard division, made the trip along Route 19 through VC-infested areas. Thanks to the 1st Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division, the journey was considerably less tricky than it might otherwise have been. In addition to securing the base camp area at An Khe, the 101st also cleared and patrolled Route 19 for the 1st Cavs' arrival. This favor was soon reciprocated when units of the 101st got into a sharp fight beyond the range of their own artillery. While half of the first team was still at sea, the air cavalrymen went into action. Grabbing helicopters as they became available, they supported the 101st with aerial rocket artillery. By airlifting in howitzer batteries and ammunition, and by flying medevac and resupply missions. From the moment of its arrival, the first team's concept of operations included 5 major points considered essential to success. The first point was that An Khe was to be the smallest, toughest, most impregnable base possible, easily defensible by a minimum force, thus leaving the maximum number free to pursue the enemy. Just as the Airmobile division was built around helicopters, so was the base built around helipads. At the now famous golf course, the birds, as the sky soldiers called them, were dispersed for maximum protection. Also, the helicopters are easily and quickly reached here from the billets and unit buildings forming the next ring of the camp. Next came the POL tank farms and other logistical installations. An Khe Mountain, which overlooks the entire base, had to be held for obvious reasons. It also served as an excellent antenna site for long-haul communications and for counter-mortar and GCA radar. Around the whole base, a barrier some 100 meters wide was stripped bare and studded with several formidable obstacles against enemy assault. Multiple lines of barbed wire fences and claymore mines. Guard towers with machine guns and searchlights. And additional barricades and checkpoints within the base. In addition to regular harassing and interdiction fires by selected batteries, positions were also prepared for all artillery units when in camp. Pre-planned defensive fires were planned, such as the quick fire concentrations plotted to cover likely enemy mortar locations. As an integral part of the defense plan, extensive and continuous infantry patrolling was conducted day and night outside the base perimeters. Plus, aerial reconnaissance and surveillance of the area. The barrier was laid out with no re-entrant angles so that aerial fires could be safely laid down from aircraft flying parallel to the camp perimeters. This concept of a compact base camp assumes total air superiority by the U.S. and is excellent under those conditions. As the second point in the division's concept of operations, the most likely areas of intensive campaigns were divided and assigned to individual brigades for intelligence and planning purposes. That is, each brigade was directed to make a thorough reconnaissance to learn all it could about the weather, the terrain, and friendly and enemy forces in its particular area or province. The third point of the concept was that the division's cavalry squadron was directed to make a very wide-ranging reconnaissance of the entire area. Particular emphasis was placed upon establishing and maintaining liaison with the special forces camps in the area for picking up detailed local intelligence. The fourth point of the concept was that the division would go to any extreme to cooperate with Allied forces. ROC and ARVN units in the area would be included in the division's planning and conduct of operations. An important lesson learned in this regard was that good relations and trust between U.S. and ROC forces had a tremendous psychological impact among the dissident and wavering Vietnamese. A realistic approach to psychological warfare and civic action comprised the final part of the division's operational concept. These activities were planned as an integral part of the overall campaign from the beginning, not tacked on as an afterthought. During those first early weeks at An Khe, a lot of routine but essential work got done. A working headquarters was established, Maintenance facilities were ready to keep the helicopters flying, and facilities were constructed to house, feed, and care for all the daily needs of some 15,000 men. The speed with which this work progressed was dramatized on 28 September when General Kennard announced that he was ready to assume his tactical area of responsibility exactly 2 months after the first air cav was ordered overseas. Operations in that tactical area of responsibility, as outlined here, required only normal coordination with other friendly forces in the area. Operations in the larger or tactical zone indicated by the solid line also required permission from the next higher headquarters, Field Force 1, and 48 hours advance notice. In actuality, however, neither zone proved restrictive, as the division regularly operated throughout an area running 150 miles from north to south and from the Cambodian border to the South China Sea. While the first cav was closing into its base camp, it was at the same time throughout the vast area assigned to it performing its primary mission, to find and destroy the enemy. To perform that mission effectively, the air cav first had to be proficient in the 5 basic military functions required of any division in combat. The first function is reconnaissance and surveillance, keeping tabs on where the enemy is and his routes of movement. This is a constant function of the first cav, and one for which it is perhaps better equipped than any other division on Earth. Of its 6 OV-1 Mohawks, 3 have an infrared capability. And 3 have the SLAR, side-looking airborne radar. All 6 have cameras and, of course, eyeballs for visual surveillance. Reconnaissance is carried out by all the combat elements of the division, but one unit particularly suited for this function is its cavalry squadron, the 1st of the 9th. The squadron's 3 air cav troops are equipped with OH-13 scout helicopters, UH-1B gunships, and UH-1D troop carriers. Here, too, both visual surveillance and reconnaissance by fire play their important roles. Although the helicopter, and the OH-13 in particular, permits slow and detailed observation of terrain, it was found that one of the surest ways of locating the enemy was in being shot at. Granted, this method wasn't overly popular with pilots, but it was certain proof of unfriendly citizens below. A usual procedure, and one that worked out very well, was to put a pair of the H-13 scout helicopters with each infantry battalion. The cav squadron also has a wheeled troop for individual reconnaissance on the ground or in conjunction with the aerial troops, a technique that has proved most effective. The first team has also mounted banks of searchlights on UH-1B helicopters, which are dispersed within the division as needed. These lightning bug and gunship teams greatly increase the first cav's capability for nighttime surveillance. Reconnaissance and surveillance, an important function in any conflict. And in this war, where locating the Viet Cong is often the most difficult task, it is this ability of the first cav to find and fix the enemy that has allowed it to maintain contact and keep pressing for weeks on end. During the Masher White Wing campaign, the division was able to keep in continuous contact with enemy forces for 43 days. Once you have found the enemy, the next step is to fight him. And to overcome him, you need firepower, the second basic function or capability required of any division in combat. In fulfilling this role, the 1st Cav relies upon many of the same weapon systems found in all divisions, plus a few new ones that came into being with Airmobile operations. When allocated by higher headquarters, medium and heavy artillery support the division, and naval gunfire is available for those operations within range of the coast. The division also has on call the immense firepower of the Air Force, with which it maintains very close coordination. An awesome combination of firepower, and during its first months of combat, the 1st Cav proved time and again that it could direct it with staggering swiftness and pinpoint focus upon an enemy that once found must be hit quickly before he slips away. A unique unit of the Air Cav that provided firepower beyond all expectations was the ARA, the Aerial Rocket Artillery. This battalion is the only one of its kind in the Army and, in essence, replaces the normal 155mm 8-inch battalion found in the Standard Infantry Division. Each of the battalion's 3 firing batteries has 12 UH-1B helicopters. Normally, they carry 24 pair of 2.75-inch rockets and are known to the sky troopers as Hogs. The 3 command and control helicopters in the headquarters battery are normal gunships armed with 7 pair of rockets and 4 flexible machine guns. Every helicopter also carries at least 1 door gunner. The door gunner, in fact, turned out to be one of the most useful citizens in the division, so much so that the troop carriers, or slicks, don't move without it. Normally, the ARA is committed in a general support role, reinforcing the ground artillery battalions. Forward observers with the infantry companies usually control fire missions. Anyone, however, can call for ARA support through the DeVarty Fire Request Net using standard artillery procedures and techniques. This battalion actually provides the division with artillery of unlimited range. For the range of the ARA is the range of the helicopter itself, and it is proved that it can stay the course. During the bloody fighting in the Ia Drang Valley, the ARA provided 23 hours of constant fire support to 1 infantry battalion until tube artillery could be brought within range. Another weapon that has made the 1st Cav's job much easier is the M102, a new 105mm howitzer. It is more accurate than the M101, has a slightly greater range, and its circular base plate permits rapid 360-degree traverse with very little effort. Its greatest advantage, however, is that it weighs some 1,200 pounds less than the M101. This greatly increases the mobility of field artillery, permitting rapid displacement of batteries to distant and otherwise inaccessible positions. And mobility, the 3rd function necessary to any division in combat, is an area in which the 1st team stands alone. What gives the 1st Air Cav its superior mobility? As Louis Armstrong once said when asked what jazz is, man, if you gotta ask, you ain't ever gonna know. Prime mover for medium to heavy loads is the CH-47 Chinook helicopter. This workhorse of the 1st Cav can easily transport the heavier M101 as well as the lightweight howitzer. With the latter, however, the Chinook can carry not only the weapon but its crew and a basic load of ammunition as well. For heavier loads up to 10 tons, the division CH-54A flying crane has the lift, the speed, and the range to do the job. To the 1st team, mobility means helicopters. And to the average Cav trooper, helicopter means Huey. For day in and day out in Vietnam, this is how he will travel, whatever the mission, whatever the distance. And to the individual infantryman who sooner or later must always advance on foot, the advantages are obvious. No longer is he bound by terrain or restricted by poor roads and enemy obstacles. He arrives at the objective fresh and in condition to complete his mission. He advances with confidence, knowing that his supporting fires can move with him and that he can be resupplied or extracted from virtually any field of battle. More often than not, however, the location of that battlefield would be such as to test the skill and ingenuity of all concerned. And to a unit without some degree of air mobility, operations in many of the areas would be impossible. Also, the first team is continuously searching for new ways to increase its mobility. The division has developed equipment and techniques for landing its troops where no landing zone exists. And once on the ground, the engineers can soon have a conventional landing zone cleared and in operation. Also, the mobility of the 1st Cav was not significantly curtailed by either bad weather or darkness. Even during the monsoon seasons, the weather is seldom bad in all areas all the time. Usually it is spotty, and with proper planning, a fast reaction unit such as the 1st Cav can exploit brief improvements in a zero ceiling condition to move troops and artillery. As for night operations, in the words of General Kennard, there was not a night over there that we didn't have helicopters operating. In short, then, the 1st Cav has the speed and the mobility to go wherever it needs to go. This advantage, however, places greater demands on the 4th necessary function of the division, command and control. When the elements involved may be 100 miles apart, with the ability to move at more than 100 miles an hour, command and control means communications with a capital C, and communications means radio. In meeting this demand, the division's commanders and communications planners thought small. Other than fixed stations, every communications system within the division has been scaled down to fit on jeeps, trailers, and mechanical mules. This MRC-95, a single sideband set, provides both voice and teletype communications up to 300 miles in normal operation. Predictably, the commanders and communications planners also thought airmobile. UH-1Ds were outfitted with a variety of lightweight radios to serve as command and control ships for battalions, brigades, and division. The radio package in this Huey, for instance, weighs only 150 pounds and was designed to replace equipment weighing more than 600. All commanders and their staff officers are thus provided with a centralized and highly mobile command post. Normally, the command and control group would include the aviation commander, a fire support element, and an Air Force liaison officer. Most importantly, the radio equipment permits simultaneous communication with different units on different frequencies. With this airborne CP, ground commanders can move with as well as communicate with all their units. The first team also adapted and outfitted CV-2 Caribous to serve as an airborne division command post, as an airborne communications center known as the Talking Bird, and as airborne radio relay stations. The airborne command post shown here in a routine checkout of the system has positions for 8 staff officers and a radio crypto operator. The 9 radios in the aircraft provide communication with all divisional units. A control panel permits any or all of the staff officers to monitor or participate in the same conversation. When equipped as an airborne radio relay, the Caribou carries 6 FM sets for automatic retransmission of messages between command and fire support elements from battalion level up. It is effective at ranges up to 125 miles. Another very handy facility for command and control is provided by this module or pod being transported by a flying crane. Equipped as a self-contained tactical operations center, the pod can be quickly flown to any area for immediate use as a division forward CP. The flying crane also performs an important role in logistics, the 5th and final function of the division. Simply stated, logistics means assuring the daily resupply, or more often if required, of all necessary items to the frontline man, wherever he may be. An unglamorous job, perhaps, but an enormous one upon which the success of all other functions ultimately depends. The logistical task begins here at An Khe, as well as at brigade and forward supply points, where cargoes are flown in from depots at Cam Bay and other ports. As highways 1 and 19 from Qui Nhon have become relatively secure, supplies are also delivered to An Khe by truck convoys. To supply a division in the field solely by air, about 32 sorties by C-130 aircraft are required daily. The working principle of the first cav is to use the largest airplane as far forward as possible. And where the larger planes can't go, the Caribou can. Also, the division's engineers can construct a remote airstrip within 2 days to handle both Caribous and C-130s. Beyond these forward supply points, logistics also becomes a mission for the helicopter. In almost all instances, direct resupply of a unit in contact with the enemy is by helicopter. It was expected that one of the greatest logistical challenges to an airmobile unit would be the resupply of fuel to keep the aircraft flying. A 500-gallon collapsible drum, easily transportable by a cargo helicopter, solved the problem. To keep the helicopters flying, you also need first-class maintenance, both on the spot and at rear echelons. This, too, is a part of logistics. In its most narrow sense, logistics may connote only the provision of such items as ammunition, rations, POL, and similar tools of war. In its broadest sense, however, logistics means providing all the services and facilities required for the morale, well-being, and health of each individual at all times. As in any war, casualties to our own forces inevitably occur in Vietnam. But today, the amazing speed with which the wounded are evacuated to complete modern medical facilities has significantly reduced the ratio of deaths among the wounded from that of World War II and Korea. To further reduce the critical interval between injury and treatment, the first cav converted one of its modules for flying cranes into an airmobile hospital. This so-called Medipod can be quickly flown to a battle area and its life-saving facilities put in operation within a few minutes. The self-contained Medipod is air-conditioned and is outfitted with all basic surgical equipment and X-ray facilities. These, then, are some of the systems, equipment, and procedures that the first Air Cav regularly employs in fulfilling its 5 basic functions: reconnaissance and surveillance, firepower, mobility, command and control, and logistics. In part 2 of this film, you will see how all of these functions are used in every operation conducted by the first team in Vietnam.
In part 1 of this film, you saw some of the systems, equipment, and procedures that the 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, regularly employs in fulfilling its 5 basic functions: reconnaissance and surveillance, firepower, mobility, command and control, and logistics. Each of these functions is dependent on all the others for success, and all of them are necessary in every operation conducted by the 1st team in Vietnam. In Vietnam, the 1st Air Cav has found itself conducting 5 essentially different but related types of operations. The first type is interdiction. Interdiction operations are conducted along the Cambodian border and in other areas where constant reconnaissance is necessary to seek out the routes that are being used to infiltrate communist forces and materiel into and throughout South Vietnam. Interdiction is usually carried out by the division's air cavalry squadron, which is particularly well suited for this type of operation. Normally, all three elements of an aerial troop, the red, white, and blue teams, would be involved. A typical mission would begin as the scout helicopters of a cavalry troop depart from a special forces or Arvin camp, where they're often co-located. The scouts or white teams work in pairs at different altitudes. This provides two perspectives as they scan the terrain for any sign of enemy forces, with special emphasis on roads, trails, and stream beds. Each scout helicopter has a door gunner observer for recon by fire. And gunships, or the red teams, normally fly cover. The squadron may also send in a section of its wheeled troop for a combined ground-air reconnaissance. This technique has proved particularly effective in areas where jungle canopies or dense vegetation prevent thorough surveillance from the air. Once a hostile force is located, the gunships of the aerial troop move in for low-altitude strafing attacks. At the same time, a third element of the cavalry troop, a regular rifle platoon or blue team, is immediately committed to find and fix the enemy. The gunships of the cavalry troop are backed up by the heavier firepower of the aerial rocket artillery battalion, which is always on call. When the situation demands it, airstrikes are also directed against the enemy positions. The overall purpose of interdiction is to disrupt newly arrived enemy forces before they have a chance to organize and attack. But another important benefit of interdiction operations is that they provide continuous, up-to-date information on the terrain and enemy and friendly forces. Since the war in Vietnam is such that you return time and again to fight in the same area, this information proved extremely valuable in planning future operations. If an enemy force located during an interdiction mission cannot be destroyed or dispersed by a cavalry troop, then larger units are immediately committed to the battle, leading to a second type of operation known as search and destroy. Since search and destroy missions have been by far the type most frequently conducted by the 1st Cav, let's look at the steps and progression in a typical operation. The first and one of the most important steps is the planning phase. At division headquarters, the commander and his staff are continuously kept abreast of the situation. Through detailed SOPs, the division is geared to react quickly, greatly reducing the amount of planning required in the field once an enemy force is located. Now the planning is concentrated upon the fine point of this particular situation. Landing zones are selected and plans made for securing them. Instructions for all elements of the operations, to include movement of artillery, preparation fires on LZs, and close air support, are spelled out. Flight routes for the troop carriers and direction of approach to the LZ are planned. Each subordinate unit is told which area of the LZ it is to secure, how far and in which direction it is to advance. Plans should be made now to preserve small unit integrity during troop load-up and movement. Ideally, each company should hit the LZ intact at the same time. To be effective, plans must be carried out quickly without any undue lapse of time that might invalidate them. The second phase of a search and destroy mission is the movement of artillery. Normally, one artillery battalion, reinforced by a battery of the ARA, supports an infantry brigade. A small infantry protecting force, usually one company per artillery battalion, secures the howitzer positions and remains with the artillery throughout the operation. The positions occupied by the batteries should allow them to deliver preparation fires on the LZs and to provide close support to the infantry throughout its advance. Also, the batteries should be able to support each other. This is especially important in Vietnam, where one of the enemy's favorite tactics is to close at almost arm's length in an attempt to escape the overwhelming firepower of the United States. The third stage of a search and destroy operation is troop load-up and movement. Here are a few of the lessons learned and techniques used by the first cab during this phase. First, each small unit leader must be told in advance which helicopters his men are to board. Identification is by colored symbols on the fuselage and numbers on the windshield. The use of pathfinders, however, greatly facilitates load-up during extractions as well as initial assaults. Second, travel light. This is one of the most difficult lessons for newcomers. You must learn to rely upon the helicopter for resupply. Weapons, ammo, 2 canteens of water, and perhaps 1 ration. Once he leaves the objective LZ, that is the basic equipment for the individual infantryman on most operations. En route to the LZ, the slicks are escorted by gunships. The flight path is either at treetop level to minimize exposure time to ground fire, or at about 1,500 feet, beyond the effective range of enemy small arms fire. Final approach to the LZ, however, is always at treetop level. While the infantry assault force is en route, the supporting fires begin their preparation of the LZ. This usually begins about 30 minutes before the slicks touch down. The preparation begins with a pre-strike by the Air Force. And is joined by TOTs from the supporting howitzer batteries. The airstrikes are directed by a forward air controller, who usually marks targets with a smoke rocket from a bird dog or other light observation aircraft. The FAC is in constant communication with the command group, which controls all aspects of the mission, usually while orbiting the area at about 1,500 feet, and can move his airstrikes as needed. The first team has Air Force liaison officers at division and brigade headquarters, plus an FAC team attached directly to each infantry battalion and the air cavalry squadron. The Air Force personnel trained, deployed, and lived with the Army units. This worked out extremely well, providing excellent and immediate air support. Often, several LZs are softened up simultaneously. This serves to deceive the enemy as to the real LZ and also preps others should an alternate become necessary. Meanwhile, gunships from the ARA battalion marry up with the troop carriers, but break away before reaching the LZ to precede the first slicks by about 1.5 minutes. There must be no let-up in supporting fires on the LZ before the assault force moves in. The howitzer batteries shift their fires about 300 meters outside the LZ, and the Air Force continues its support to the flanks and against close-in suspected targets. Then the ARA plummets in to rake all edges of the LZ with rocket fire. The effectiveness of this combination of teamwork and firepower is demonstrated by the fact that the first cab has seldom had an LZ contested by the enemy. Usually, resistance is not encountered until the infantry is on the ground. One of the most critical stages is now approaching for the individual infantryman. Touchdown at the LZ. He must be ready to fight the moment he hits the ground. Each man must know exactly what he is to do, and do it automatically. If there's been a change of LZ or direction of approach, the pilot will have told everyone. During the final approach, the escort gunships break away from the troop columns and strafe the flanks of the LZ about 30 seconds before the first slicks arrive. As the troop carriers touch down, this is the moment when both man and machine are most vulnerable to enemy fire. You must get off the LZ on the double. This will not only minimize the chance of your being hit, but also makes room for the next serial of slicks, which follows by about 30 seconds. It requires about 60 Hueys to move an infantry battalion, and the LZ should ideally be large enough to handle 10 or 12 slicks in each serial. The first serial of troops secures only the immediate LZ. Succeeding waves move through them to enlarge the perimeter. Organic supporting weapons are brought in and set up in pre-designated positions as soon as possible to bolster all-around security. Another point on selecting landing zones. Take the high ground has been a basic axiom of battle tactics for centuries. It still applies, but with a new twist. Airmobile units can begin their attack from the high ground rather than fighting to gain it. This has two primary advantages. First, the enemy's defenses are uniformly oriented toward the ground below, and landing above him means landing behind him. Second, movement downhill is faster and less fatiguing for friendly forces. As the infantry moves out in search of the enemy, the most difficult and dangerous stage of a search and destroy mission begins. But it is also the payoff, the ultimate purpose of all the preparation that has gone before. In Vietnam, it is often impossible to distinguish between friend and foe. To avoid harming non-combatants without taking an inordinate risk calls for a nicety of judgment and a discipline never before demanded of our forces. As the infantry continues to advance, supporting fires are readily available if resistance is encountered. In addition to field artillery, the ARA gunships and Air Force fighter bombers remain on station if needed. The purpose of a search and destroy operation is not to seize territory and hold it permanently, but to locate the enemy and to eliminate him as an effective fighting force, to capture him, to kill him, or to drive him out of the area, to capture or destroy his weapons and equipment, to destroy or disrupt his sources of supply, and to eliminate his terrorist influence upon the peaceful civilian population. Often civilians are temporarily resettled to prevent their forced collaboration with the Viet Cong. A search and destroy mission disrupts the enemy's plans and disorganizes his forces. It drives him underground and keeps us on the move. It doesn't give the enemy time to get set for the minutely planned, painstakingly rehearsed attack that he favors. Also, captured weapons and equipment, as well as prisoners and captured documents, are important sources of information as to enemy strength, location, movements, and plans. They may provide the intelligence for even more successful search and destroy missions in the future. Although a large-scale search and destroy operation conducted by division or a brigade may continue for several weeks, the limits of individual endurance and morale are recognized. As a rule, small units are not kept in constant contact or pursuit of the enemy for extended periods. They are rotated to a secure forward base to serve as the reaction force. This provides an opportunity for rest, sanitation, and changes of uniform. If a regular bath point is not available during prolonged online engagements, expedient means for keeping clean can usually be found. In Vietnam, where the combination of temperature, humidity, insects, and disease may produce more casualties than the Viet Cong, sanitation is particularly important. A search and destroy mission ends with the extraction of units, which can also be a pretty hairy maneuver. More often than not, an LZ will have to be cleared for the helicopters. A favorite tactic of the enemy during extraction is to close in around your ever-diminishing perimeter in an attempt to zap the last unit. A few points to remember. 1, Keep your security out. 2. Hold your automatic weapons for the last lift. Provide the greatest possible firepower until the last moment. 3. Keep a forward observer until the final lift to call for artillery fire. 4. Gunships should remain on station until the last man is extracted. 5. When you do move out, move out. Speed is just as essential in an extraction as during the initial assault. The same basic precautions for extractions apply when retrieving a helicopter that has been grounded. Normally, a small force is lifted in to secure the area and prevent capture of the helicopter by the enemy. Occasionally, this force must hold fast overnight, or perhaps longer, before retrieval can be made. Recovery of damaged helicopters is important for 2 reasons. First, it maintains the efficiency of the division by restoring an essential element to operation against the enemy. Second, it prevents the metal from being used in mines and booby traps by the VC. A search and destroy mission, then, is not intended to capture and hold territory. But if sufficient South Vietnamese forces are available, it may lead to another type of operation that is. This is the 3rd type of operation conducted by the 1st Cav, and it is known as clear and hold. In many ways, clear and hold is similar to search and destroy. But now, the objective is to hold or control a given area, to return the land and its potential to the South Vietnamese people, and to re-establish control by the South Vietnamese government. To do that, you must not only remove the Viet Cong and their influence from the civilian population, you must keep it away permanently. This can be partly accomplished by ferreting out the main force VC and destroying his bases and sources of supply. Equally important, however, is the psychological aspect of the operation. In order to win the loyalty and cooperation of the civilian populace, you must convince both them and the VC that you are there to stay. You must demonstrate that both United States and South Vietnamese forces are able and willing to protect the loyal citizens. Units of the 1st Cav often return to areas that have been previously cleared for a show of force and to prevent reprisals by the VC against local leaders. In this respect, however, one important point should be made. A clear and hold operation always involves and must be fully coordinated with military forces and officials of the South Vietnamese government. Clear and hold is in all respects solely a military operation designed to wrest control from the VC. A 4th type of operation in which the 1st Cav found itself greatly involved was support to other units, both United States and Allied. This support took many shapes and forms. Often it meant providing fire support for many units on all types of missions. It sometimes meant giving assistance to the 101st Airborne in the protection of rice harvests. But nearly always, support to other units meant the movement of troops or heavy equipment. For the 1st team was the 1st unit in the theater with a large Chinook helicopter and the flying crane. Not surprisingly, one of the primary tasks for the heavy lift helicopter was the retrieval of damaged aircraft. Before the 1st Cav arrived, aircraft downed in inaccessible terrain had to be abandoned to the enemy. This support by the 1st Cav extends to other services as well as Army units. Here a downed Navy aircraft is being retrieved. A flying crane quickly transports the damaged plane directly to the deck of a ship at anchor for repair or salvage. In many instances, support to other units began the moment Allied forces arrived in South Vietnam. Members of the 1st team helped provide initial security for the arrival in country of the 25th Infantry Division, the 4th Infantry Division, and units from the Republic of Korea. This activity consisted of clearing and securing roadways and providing escorts for the newly committed units from their point of arrival to their base camp area. Clearing and securing roads and highways was indeed the final type of operation conducted by the 1st Cav. When roads are opened, it is primarily for daytime use, but the 1st Cav has operated sizable convoys at night between Qui Nhon, An Khe, and Bang San. In opening a section of roadway, mutually supporting howitzer batteries are positioned to command passes and other critical areas. Gunships fly cover for convoys and scout ahead of them to search for enemy forces. Also, rapid reaction units are kept on standby for immediate deployment to any scene of ambush. These combined techniques have, for the most part, eliminated ambushes of sizable units. Today, the mining of highways and attacks upon solitary vehicles are the VC's primary tactics against Allied transportation in the 1st Cav area. The 1st Cav is less dependent on roads than other divisions, but keeping the highways open has definite military advantages. It facilitates the resupply of base camps and forward areas. It aids other United States and Allied units, and it denies use of the highways to the enemy. Of equal importance is the impact of secure highways on the civilian population. Freedom from terrorist attack will improve civilian transportation, help to physically reunite the country, and aid the South Vietnamese economy. It is therefore an important part of the overall revolutionary development effort. In this program, the 1st Cav gives assistance and advice to the civilian population and to government agencies in resettling and rebuilding this area of the nation. Assistance may take such obvious and relatively easy forms as providing employment for South Vietnamese civilians. This aids the Vietnamese economy and also frees United States troops for more critical jobs. Of greater significance is the work done in helping the Vietnamese to improve their own standard of living. 1st Cav volunteers help train specialists in many fields such as agriculture and introduce better strains of vegetables and livestock. In other civic action projects, 1st Cav volunteers help the Vietnamese, both children and adults, with their education. And always, inevitably, sick calls. It has been said that the best example of psychological warfare is a United States Army medic treating a small child in a remote village in Southeast Asia. Certainly there is no event more welcomed by young and old alike than a visit by an Army medical team. The 1st Cav began using this humanitarian approach soon after its arrival in Vietnam and regularly includes medical aid to civilians as a part of all its operations. But the 1st team has gone further than that. It helped to build and maintain a modern dispensary near the base camp at An Khe, where the more seriously ill are cared for under clean, clinical conditions. This also provides an opportunity for Vietnamese medical specialists to improve their professional skills. The objective, then, of revolutionary development, or a clear and hold operation, which really go hand in hand, is to help the Vietnamese to help themselves, to give them pride and confidence in themselves and their government. The 1st team supports this objective in many ways, such as sponsoring civilian military festivals like Operation Good Friend. And revolutionary development is the ultimate objective of all 5 types of operations conducted by the 1st Cav. Of interdiction, search and destroy, clear and hold, support to other units, and of road security. Before it had been in existence a full year, the 1st Air Cavalry Division had already firmly established itself both in the annals of military history and as one of the most effective fighting units in Vietnam. Shortly before leaving the 1st Cav for another assignment, General Kennard, who had commanded the division since the test years of the 11th Air Assault, discussed the effectiveness of air mobility in combat.
In this combat, in which we've engaged since last September, we found to our great satisfaction that the techniques, the tactics, the equipment that was developed during the 11th Air Assault days and since then has proven itself extremely well in actual combat with the real enemy. We've fought the Viet Cong guerrillas, we've fought the main force VC, and we have fought full regiments and in fact full divisions of the North Vietnamese Army. This has been the combat test of the 1st Air Cavalry Division. We have found that uniformly we are able to fight these people not on their terms but on our terms because of our increased mobility, and that we are able to overcome them.
Since General Kennard's departure, the 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, has been led in combat by 2 additional commanders. Major General John Norton assumed command in May of 1966 and relinquished command in April of 1967 to Major General John J. Tolson III. Since its arrival in Vietnam, the 1st Cav has also received thousands of replacements through rotation and, with little additional training, has successfully integrated them into elite airmobile units. Vietnam has also demonstrated that the 1st Cav is not a special division limited to a specific mission. Combined operations with other types of divisions have proved the 1st Cav's flexibility and its ability to operate throughout the extremes of warfare and terrain in Vietnam. One symbol of the dedication, esprit de corps, and the responsibility shouldered by the 1st Team in Vietnam is the number of awards its members have earned for bravery and heroism. During its first 2 years in combat, Air Cavalrymen received 28 Distinguished Service Crosses, more than 400 Silver Stars, 7,000 Bronze Stars, more than 45,000 Air Medals, and the Medal of Honor was awarded to Lieutenant Walter J. Marm, Jr. in December of 1966. Since then, Sergeants James Stewart and David Dolby have also received the country's highest military award. The success of a division or the validity of a concept can no more be judged by the honors and achievements of a few individuals than can the individual soldier judge the success or failure of a specific operation solely by the number of his comrades fallen in battle. The validity of the airmobile concept can, however, be indicated by the many operations successfully completed by the 1st Team. Operation Lincoln, Happy Valley, Masher White Wing, Bon Son, Operation Pershing, Lamy Diadron. In addition to those better-known campaigns of division strength, the 1st Cav has also conducted hundreds of battalion-size operations. The combat test of the 1st Air Cav also has a greater significance than the success of its own individual battles. As the mobility of the 1st Cav increases, so does that of the entire Army, as other units adapt the equipment, tactics, and techniques developed and pioneered by the Air Cav. The experience, the know-how, the lessons learned by the 1st Team in Vietnam will be of major importance in shaping the future of Army-wide mobility, upon which success in combat depends today as never before in history. In recognition of the division's performance during the Play Me Ia Drang campaign, in the fall of 1965, a presidential unit citation for extraordinary heroism was awarded to the 1st Cavalry Division on September 15, 1967. In a ceremony at the White House, President Johnson paid tribute to the men of the 1st Team for their valor and outstanding performance of duty in completely defeating a numerically superior enemy, including regular units of the Army of North Vietnam. This was only the 5th time in our military history that a full division and attached units has received a presidential citation. But perhaps the best evaluation of the role of air mobility in Vietnam was made by President Johnson. The 1st Cavalry, he said, in awarding the unit citation, has proved that the enemy can never win in Vietnam by armed conquest.